Welcome. Thank you for joining us from around the world. My name is Jonathan Lever. I am the Executive Vice President and Chief Executive Officer at the Fetzer Institute, and I'm delighted to serve as your host today. Since we are going to be talking about spirituality and the inner wisdom that comes from being spiritually grounded, I wanted to just invite all of us to take 30 seconds to pause, to center yourself, just to come into this space. I'm going to close my eyes, do whatever feels comfortable to you, and then we'll get started. Thank you all. Thank you all so much. I am calling in today from Kalamazoo, Michigan, the ancestral lands of the Potawatomi, Peoria, and Odawa people. We acknowledge their enduring relationship with this land and are grateful for the ways in which Indigenous wisdom and leadership continue to enrich our broader community. We are gathering at a time when so many of our systems, social, political, economic, environmental, are under huge strain. Around the world, communities are searching not only for effective solutions, but for deeper meaning. At the Fetzer Institute, we believe that lasting social transformation requires more than just strategy and more than just skill and scale. It requires spiritual foundations, the inner and communal resources that cultivate compassion, courage, moral imagination, and a commitment to shared flourishing. Today's conversation explores spiritual solutions in action, not spirituality as an afterthought, but as a source of wisdom, resilience, and innovation in addressing these complex challenges. Through storytelling, we begin to see how communities are drawing on spiritual traditions and practices to respond to injustice, division, the environmental crisis, and community breakdown. So let me introduce our Spiritual Solutions Library. The Spiritual Solutions Library highlights real examples of spiritually grounded responses to social challenges. It currently includes more than 80 global case studies. These stories span journalism and documentary film, essays, media storytelling. And importantly, this work was created in collaboration with more than 25 global storytellers. Each brings professional credibility, lived experience, and deep engagement with the communities that they document. Rather than talk about the library in kind of an abstract way, we wanted you to hear directly from the storytellers themselves, the people who surfaced and told the stories that you can see in the Spiritual Solutions Library. So let me do some brief introductions. I want to introduce Dr. Joost Verwoerd. He is he's Associate Professor of Transformative Imagination. I think hands down the best title of anyone I've ever heard. He is associated with Copernicus Institute of Sustainable Development, as well as Utrecht University. His work explores how creative practices help to transform societies towards better futures. Recently, he has explored what he calls infrastructures of mystery, the social conditions that allow deeper connection to life, to nature, and to one another. We will drop that in the chat. Next, I'd like to introduce Noel Rojo, Mexican-American multimedia journalist and photographer based in Oaxaca, Mexico. His work explores the in-between spaces of human experience, transitions, pauses, and moments of transformation. His photography and his storytelling have appeared in such outlets as Thomas Reuters Foundation, The New Humanitarian, Manga Bay. He's the co-founder of the global project Women Who Stay. And right next to him is Magdalena Rojo, freelance multimedia journalist and documentary photojournalist. She covers global issues including migration, climate crisis, and human rights, with a focus on women and indigenous communities. Her work emphasizes solutions journalism and the dignity and resilience of vulnerable communities. So let's invite a conversation here. Together, their work reflects the journalistic depth, the moral imagination, and global perspective that shape the Spiritual Solutions Library. So let's begin with the stories themselves. So Noel, I think I'll start with you. Your photo essay on the Chinampas of Xochimilco recently won a Wilbur Award from the Religion Communicators Council. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Um, what did this recognition mean to you, and how did this story actually come together?
Well, I mean, it was great to receive such an award, to be frank. And the story was pretty important for me because I've been wanting to go to the Chinampa place in Xochimilco in Mexico for quite some time already. I just hadn't had the chance to have gone, and it's just it was such an integral part of the ancient world here in Mexico, the traditions, the myths that we know. So the Chinampas, as many of you might not know, are a ancient form of agriculture, and it's very productive. However, just like everywhere else in the world, the young people are also leaving this place. And I really wanted to go there because it's been at the center of Mexico and the spirituality of Mexico. Before Christianity, as many of you know, Mexico is a Christian nation, but there is just so much of this Christianity has to do with ancient traditions. So it's it's just all over the place when it comes to religion. And I
Thank you.
wanted to know more about it.
Fantastic. That's your journalist instinct and your desire to go. So came together beautifully. Um, Let me go to Magdalena. Your documentary, which was amazing, The Guardians of the Sacred Bees, also received an award of excellence. Tell me what inspired this project and what did you learn as you brought this amazing story to life?
Yeah, hello everyone. Thank you for having us. And yeah, Guardians of the Sacred Bees is a story that we worked on together with Noel. It was this short documentary that we created in Yucatan Peninsula here in Mexico. And we followed the work of the School of Ecological Agriculture called UITSCAN. And basically, this school was started 30 years ago by 13 Catholic priests who decided they wanted to support indigenous communities who were living of agriculture, which is becoming very difficult everywhere in the world, just like what Noah mentioned already. And as they started working with these Maya communities in the Yucatan Peninsula, they discovered that before people used to do beekeeping, but not of the bees that we know from Europe or even Northern America or like the US, but they were stingless Melipona bees that are native to the Yucatan Peninsula, that are very important to the local ecosystems, but they're also very important to the Maya people because they consider them sacred. And it's because these bees are very selective of what plants they pollinate, and their honey has specific medicinal properties. So like people believe that they are sacred because the honey has for centuries been healing them basically, and they used to co-live with these animals, but these animals at some point, the bees, the Melipona bees, were facing extinction almost in the Yucatan Peninsula, and due to various reasons, climate change being one of them. But then, of course, the development that is going on the peninsula because of the tourism mostly, also use of chemicals in agriculture and so on and so on. And also another thing that affected it was that because these bees are fragile, since they're stingless, they cannot protect themselves, they need a lot of care. But they don't produce as much honey as the bees that we are familiar with. So people were kind of slowly abandoning the practice of beekeeping. And this school comes in and they kind of want to help to reintroduce this practice in order to conserve these bees because they're very important for the ecosystem, as I already mentioned. They start working together with the Maya communities. However, they're not only focusing on the price of the products that these bees contribute to, but they're focusing on their value. And the value lies in the spiritual value for these communities, basically. So these communities used to do ceremonies for the bees. And not only when they were harvesting the honey, but also they did the ceremony to ask Mother Nature for plants to grow, which at the same time was a commitment for the same people to plant the flowers that these bees can pollinate. So there was this beautiful thing that we could observe how the spirituality is something that adds another value to the work, and it's not like people didn't want to continue with the beekeeping because there was no economic value, but thanks to the work of this school, they started rediscovering the spiritual value of the bees and their value for the whole ecosystem and for the community as such as well. And that's what we tried to capture with the video that we made.
Yeah, thank you. It really is beautiful. What surprised you in learning about their work?
Maybe not necessarily, it wasn't maybe not necessarily surprising anymore to us, but what Noel mentioned, that the syncretism is in Mexico is incredibly interesting. And so there was this beautiful moment when we were invited to attend one of the ceremonies that the school organizes together with the communities. It's a very participative process, which is, I'm saying it's not surprising anymore because we have seen different initiatives working this way. But the ceremony was beautiful in a sense that there was this Catholic priest who established the school 30 years ago, but he was there only as an observer. And he was basically just lighting up candles for the people and kind of saying what the next step would be. But it was the indigenous people, the Maya people themselves, who were guiding the ceremony, who were in charge of it, who were in control. And it's always really beautiful to see how these two cosmovisions somehow coexist in a very respectful way. And so even though the school was established, I have to say that's a fun fact that the director of the school told us that 30 years ago when they wanted to start the school, there was even a special commission created within the Catholic Church to actually follow their steps because it was suspicious what they were going to do and like how they were going to work with the indigenous communities. And it turned out to be like this beautiful project of coexistence somehow.
Oh, that's beautiful. And the fact that the person who helped get that going was still participating and participated in the ceremony. That is a beautiful sort of transmission of lineage. Thank you for that. Let me turn maybe to you now, Joost. Your essay, Infrastructures of Mystery, has really gotten a lot of attention and discussion. So maybe for the benefit of all of us, tell us what you mean by infrastructures of mystery and how did exploring that idea shape your work with the Spiritual Solutions Library?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, infrastructures of mystery is sort of an evolution of an idea that's making waves in the world of participatory imagination and future scenarios, and this sort of space that I'm in the context of systems change, which is my background, sort of systems transformations and imagine futures. And I was doing a project for over the course of about a year with folks in the city of Utrecht, with the city council, asking this question of who gets to be involved in the imagination of the future and who doesn't, and how do different infrastructures, financial infrastructures, physical spaces, temporal infrastructures, who's got time, space, money, and so on, to even be involved in imagining what the future might be. And this idea of imagination infrastructure is very useful for that. But as the conversation went on, I realized that there's something that's not being discussed, which is rather than always making news stories about the future, how do people get space to even be in contact with whatever they would describe as the sacred, right? In all the different ways that people are in contact with that. And what are the infrastructures that allow or disallow that, right? And so this question, and it's a question, a response to the crisis of our time, I think, which is really a crisis of people being able to connect to meaning and the sacred in many ways. And so the question is, how do we go from this conversation with people where we ask them to talk about their private experiences of the sacred, the mystery of being, whatever you want to call it. I emphasize mystery because I like to emphasize the not knowing and this sort of humility, that's there, because that allows us to talk to each other across our different experiences. How do you go from that very private experience to talking about policy, to talk about public investments? I am involved with they're building a new city next to Utrecht, a suburb, but it's city-sized, and the people in the city council are interested in using infrastructures of mystery as a starting point for that conversation. How do you build a city in which life can be meaningful, in which people can co-create their sense of the sacred, of meaning, of magic? What does it mean for families? What does it mean for kids to live in these neighborhoods? The Netherlands is a space where where we are sort of like very well known for being good planners, but the planning is often kind of soulless. Not in the old cities, but the new sort of mega suburbs are not particularly sort of like infrastructures of mystery in that sense. So getting involved with policymakers in that sort of space is interesting as well. And but this question goes in many different levels. I work on video games a lot. I'm working on a video game called All Will Rise at the moment, which is a game about taking a billionaire to court for destroying a sacred river in the south of India, because a bunch of our team members are from India. And that is also a game that we make to try to show that games and the games industry, which is by far the biggest form of entertainment media out there now, can also be an infrastructure for mystery. It isn't always, it often isn't, but it could be. And the way that people engage with games as sacred, as sacred text is very, under researched compared to literature and film and so on, and music, of course, especially as media for engaging with the sacred. So there's a lot to explore there, but I think, and where I think it also aligns with what I understand that Fetzer is doing, is having that sort of spiritual lens to look at the world's problems and say, what if this is infrastructure for mystery? So of course there are infrastructures that are very obviously infrastructures for mystery, religious sites and so on, and retreat centers and these kinds of things. But what about live venues, right? What about the games industry? What about online spaces? What about parks and nature? What happens if we speak with people who are in the management of the natural world and in ecosystems and ask them, what does it mean to you to see this as infrastructure for engaging with the mystery and being with the mystery of life? And I'm finding that this is an undercurrent, right? Many people privately think about this quite a lot, but they just feel like there's no space at work to talk about it. So what happens when we have a policy conversation about this? That's sort of the driving impulse. And it's a conversation you can have in many sectors, which makes it quite interesting.
Yeah, thank you for that, Joost. Yeah, I think, what I'm hearing is each of you in your own way has made the implicit more explicit. And perhaps even your inviting people to talk about that created a kind of permission structure that left to their own devices, folks just choose either not to share it or don't feel like it's safe to share. And I love the fact that you're describing how even in public policy and in community development and economic development, these issues are at least starting to get voiced. So it's amazing that you all have helped us just find some beautiful examples of all of this. Well, let's step back for a moment and explore this question about what makes a solution spiritual. Each of you, in some ways, are a journalist. You're curious, so you're always looking for sort of the next story. And so, the mandate here was really about how do we find spiritual solutions. So I'd love to ask all of you, whoever would like to jump in, what did you find makes these solutions distinctly spiritual? And how do you think that makes a difference? I mean, each of you sort of alluded to this, but what's the delta, if you will? What's the difference between, as you called it, a soulless solution, Joost, or well, maybe one that's soul-filled? What did you learn in this experience of collecting these stories? Anyone who wants to jump in?
Go ahead.
I can start. So as we already spoke about it before we went live, sometimes it's the people themselves who run the solutions, that you like meet them and they're spiritually grounded and they talk to you and like you see that this is something that they live, who they are. And that's what makes the solution spiritual. Sometimes it's the tools, I would say, that people use. Like I was already talking about ceremonies, about rituals. There are all these moments that that organizations, initiatives, or just people create to like make their work more effective, let's say. But I wouldn't speak about effectiveness in the sense that, yeah, there are these numbers that we need to fulfill, but more like, for example, the ceremonies that I mentioned with the bees that people do. It's not only for the bees, but it's a community event where people gather, where they like are free to express their spirituality, their beliefs, where they are not judged, where they like can leave behind all these like I even want to say traumas, right? Because indigenous people in Mexico were not able to express their spirituality freely for such a long time. And these ceremonies like bring community together, that young people can see that this is ours, this is who we are, this is our identity as well. And so it goes way beyond numbers or like economic benefit. If we talk about bees, there's way more to it.
In a sense, the solution becomes spiritual when it changes behavior, even when it comes at a cost, I believe. Yeah.
Say more about that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
say more about that.
basically, on the story of the Chinampas, there was this really interesting moment where I saw a lot of people were working there. So they basically laid down these planks on top of this mud, and they're planting little seeds, mostly for herbs like cilantro and stuff like that. But it's very tedious work, and so they're putting one seed at a time, and they do this for hours. It's backbreaking work, and they need all the help they can get from the group. However, there was this one guy that came in, and he had just had some family issues, and so he was not having a good day, and he offered to help them, but the people refused his help, and they're like, no, 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 it's okay, you go ahead and take care of yourself, go and do something else. This is really hard. But the reason why he was not allowed was not so much that they didn't need his help, but they didn't want that energy, from that bad energy, to go into the seedlings, so the solution here was, to plant the seeds, but because of their belief system, it didn't they decided not to take his help, because they didn't want his energy to interfere with the greater work. And so even though they needed the help, they decided that their spiritual aspect of this tradition was more important than just productivity alone. And so it shaped that behavior.
Yeah.
That's a great example. Yeah, that's so fascinating. Yeah, go ahead, Yos. I think you wanted to get in here.
Yeah, I think for me it's a question of what experience of reality does the work come from. Um, it has to do with this sort of paradigm shift. There's really great work about systems change by Danello Meadows, which is quite old by now, but is very influential. She describes all these changes in a system's goals and in a system's stocks and flows. It's all sort of very systemsy, and then all the way at the bottom, at the sort of most fundamental leverage point for changing a system, she talks about really changing one's entire experience of reality, right? And I think if we what makes to me a solution spiritual is if it comes from a place from just having a very different relationship to what it means to be alive. And this is an interesting question because I wrote an article recently about how work fighting for a better world is always spiritual work, and it's really difficult if you don't recognize that yourself. So, and it was inspired by a friend of mine who's an academic but who does a lot of work with refugees, with policy, and she is burning up her life to do it. It's amazing work, but she feels, and I asked her about her spiritual sort of like connection to that, and she says that she doesn't have it. And it's, to me, I felt like this is someone whose acts are so empathetic and so loving and so caring, but then is sort of like running out of energy and running out of support because she does not have a sense of being carried by life.
Mhm.
And I think that's there are many people out there, I think, who maybe do not recognize that how helpful it would be to sort of shift to a different paradigm, a different experience, and work from there, because it's just much more sustainable, it's more connective, it's yeah, it's hope giving and so on, right? So I think that's the difference. There is a difference. You can do many of the same things, but if you have a different conversation about what they mean and in what sort of collective imaginary they occur together, different opportunities open up. You know, you have the spiritual perspective opens up the spiritual solutions in that sense. You just see the world differently. The world is a different place, and therefore different things are possible.
Yeah, so I mean, what I hear you saying, Joost, is that you can be an extraordinary social change agent and do extraordinary good in the world, but you're inviting us, or you're saying that you're seeing in real time the difference of rooting that sort of social activism in a spiritual place versus I don't know what the verses would be. What would a
I mean,
secular?
yes, I mean a secular, but I think in the example of my friend, I think that, you know, I see her work as profoundly spiritual, but if there's no way for her to nourish herself with her connection with life, and she's just doing it because she feels a sense of responsibility, but it's draining her, and she's left lonely and feels separated, and only the sense of responsibility, which is beautiful, is the only thing that keeps her going. I just don't think that's very sustainable. We are fighting a fight for the future of the planet, and we need to be nourishing and supporting each other in that. We need all the energy and all the care that's available, right? It's not easy. It's a marathon. So
Does that resonate with you, Noel and Magdalena? Are you seeing that too?
Yes, definitely. Which is kind of interesting to see it. We are in a pandemic of loneliness now, and more people are very disconnected, not just from the world as we know it, but from not just from people, but from the world as itself, you know. They're uprooted from their land. And yeah, I think it's that feeling of connection to something more than you, to the greater whole, no?
Mm.
I have to say that has been great gift that we have received here, living here in Mexico, because the cosmovision of local indigenous people is that they feel interconnected with everything that is around. And the story about bees was the same. Like they were saying, yeah, we're taking care of these bees, but at the same time, the bees are taking care of us, of our health, of our emotions, right? And so like
yeah.
people feel this interconnection here. But I would also like to follow up on what Jos was saying, that basically some work is just spiritual and you cannot like take that spirituality away from it. And it's another story that we worked on was the story of midwives helping pregnant migrants at the border, US Mexican border, and like just like giving a birth to a baby being born is a spiritual moment. It's a moment where life meets death, and it's basically the systems that we work within kind of like took the spirituality away and forgot it and like don't pay attention to it, but it is a spiritual moment. So the work that the midwives are doing, no matter how they're doing it, is already spiritual. Obviously these midwives are very aware of their work being spiritual, and the way they work with women is incredible, but basically the moment of giving a birth is a spiritual moment. So the work itself, it's already spiritual in that sense.
Yeah. And there's also, I think there's also a lot of stuff that's getting called spiritual that I would not see as spiritual, that's just rooted in narcissism, and you know, it's in a religious context, but it just feeds whatever's going on now. So yeah, the reverse is also true, I think.
Yeah, like when you sit and listen to the three of you speak, it sort of seems like this makes so much sense. Of course, right? If you have a deeper reservoir from which to draw from, you have more hope, you feel a sense of wholeness and flourishing. So you all have some hypotheses as why isn't this catching fire? Particularly, I'd say, well, yeah, particularly maybe in the Western world.
I can jump in quickly. I think so. It relates to this idea of imagination and what we can imagine. You know, people talk about that there's a crisis of the imagination or a crisis of meaning, but I would say I mean, yes, but only in the sense that that we're just being flooded with imagination. We're being flooded with sort of chaotic meaning, you know. We are constantly being drowned and inundated in ways to make sense of the world that are grabbing our attention constantly, constantly, constantly. So even though these alternatives are out there, there's the attention economy is making it so difficult for these things to be visible, and especially because you need to slow down, you need to take time, maybe a few days, right, or a moment every morning, all these kinds of things, in the struggle to survive financially, in all the ways that we're addicted to sort of the attention economy, and you know, so on. We're living in this in a sort of racket of imagination and so-called meaning making that makes the space for this very difficult to find.
Yeah, I think Joost has a really interesting point there about the attention economy and how it's basically hijacking our biology.
Yeah.
It's just not allowing us to actually tap into the world, because we're just tapped into the other, you know, into the internet, and it's just because it's been hijacked.
Do you, Yost, back to you on, I know you've done a lot of work around gaming and are innovating new games all the time. Do you feel, are people seeking those out because they're looking for a spiritual dimension, or is that the effect of just playing a cool new game and it has these, it takes you to places you maybe weren't expecting?
I think most games don't. I think most games are just like everything else in our modern attention economy, trying to get people, you know, let me put it like this. Most mainstream large budget games are trying to get people, you know, gently addicted, or maybe not so gently. They're feeding us trash ideas and so on. But there are exceptions. There's a thriving field of game developers who are making smaller games, sometimes even the bigger studios, that are made with a lot of love and a lot of care and a lot of desire to create a communal space for joy and experience and connection. They're not the majority, but they definitely exist, and sometimes they're very big and sometimes they're smaller. I think that people can be surprised by how touching and how resonating games can be, and how deeply games can engage with questions of what it means to be alive. Or people can look for them. There's a lot of people that are interested mostly in deeper, slower games that are just a very different experience from the sort of dopamine mill that many other games represent. It's in a way similar to cinema, right? There are beautiful, meaningful films, and then there's a lot of crap, and these things exist. And that same thing with literature as well, right? And sometimes the crap is spiritual. I mean, so games as a monolithic, games as a monolithic space, we need to get rid of that a little bit. There are very different parts of it in the ecosystem, and great potential for. The interesting thing about games, I think, in that case, is that games are an embodied experience. You are playing the game, you take agency, you play a role, and yeah, that makes for opportunities for the sort of an embodied experience of the sacred, sometimes including very sort of like sort of dark awe experiences of deep not knowing and confusion and the dark night of the soul and so on. That is explored in games as well, and is very games that are challenging to people, that don't comfort you and make you feel like a hero, but basically make you feel very small and very humble and very confused. You know, it's possible, and it's a wonderful space to explore. It's not most games though, so I think that's important to say. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Well, many people in this audience, I guess maybe let's come back to the real world here in a way. Many people in this audience work in research-driven, evaluation-focused environments. Impact is most frequently defined in terms of metrics and policy change and measurable outcomes. So I guess I'd be curious, in your experience, how does spiritual framing deepen or strengthen this work in ways that metrics alone can't capture? Or how do you all, how are you all being advocates for this lens in a world that is increasingly, or not increasing, is just de facto more metrics focused? How do you all wrestle with that?
I would like to bring in again the example of the midwives, because I was thinking about that, and I was like, we asked the midwife that started the organization that is now that has been running for like 10 years now. Her name is Jimena Rojas Garcia, and We asked her many times, okay, so how many babies were born in this space that you created? Or like, how many women do you attend a week, a month? And we spent the whole week with her, and I have never seen her once at the computer or not even with the paper writing down like, okay, this woman was from there and she was doing this here. And she really didn't have an answer to that. But it's basically, to her, it was not important when she started doing this work, and it's not necessarily important at the moment, because she just one day crossed the border between the US and Mexico. She saw these huge lines of people waiting to cross to the US, and many of these people were women with babies or women who were pregnant. And she just started attending them. She started like checking their blood pressure or whatever they needed to have checked. And she like didn't count them, or like, that's how her work started, and that's how it continues until now. That doesn't want to say that she was not able to change, to achieve systemic change. So for example, before, women in Tijuana, pregnant or like migrant women, would not be allowed into hospitals because they don't have official registration number, of they are not registered within the Mexican system. She was able to change that, not on a national level, but now there are 2-3 health centers in Tijuana where women can come and they are going to accept them into the hospital even if they don't have registration number. This is a huge change already. And so very often, like, numbers or other statistics don't provide the full picture of what is going on. They're very limiting. They can be very limiting. They can be helpful at some other occasions, but sometimes also when we just follow the numbers, then we lose the whole picture. And that was definitely the case of this organization of midwives working with the pregnant migrants. And obviously, it's necessary for them to know where the migrants come from if they want to make sure that there are interpreters available from their languages in the hospitals. So they still need to keep track. But I believe in this case, the work of Jimena and her team came before policy changes. It came even maybe before research on certain issues that they are facing at their work. And it just came because there was a need. And this woman like felt the need to respond to that need in the field, on the ground.
And also, I think because she really did came from that position where she had that spiritual frame instead of, just quantitative. And so for her, it was more about the quality of relationships than anything else.
Yeah, I'm going to do this work because these women have been through so much, and I want them to have safe space when they're delivering their babies or when they are pregnant. And that like word safe space, and these midwives all say it, it's not necessarily physical space. It can be a person. And that's again something it's really hard to quantify. Like, what is safe space? To everybody, it's something different. It's somebody else, So there are these concepts that are very spiritual and that are really hard to put numbers on.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's what I think I so appreciate about your storytelling, because that is a way to tell a story that speaks to the whole humanity of this, and not, I mean, I think if there were a funder looking for a grant report, she could have reported how many babies were delivered, and that would have really missed the entire point of it.
Yeah.
So, sorry, Jos, did you want to say something?
Yeah. So I'm the at the Copernicus Institute at Utrecht University. I'm supposedly the head of impact so I have to tell 600 people at our institute how to think about impact. And I was also involved in a project that really struggled with this impact question because it was about how creative practices in the arts contribute to societal change. It was a project called Creatures. And we had this discussion for years of how do you capture what cannot be captured in a way, right? And how can you talk about this in a way that doesn't destroy it and flatten the value and the beauty of it? And it's a difficult question, but I think it has a lot to do with this sort of desire to be quantitative, right? I think if you capture stories, which of course we're talking about here, stories can provide clear evidence of what is actually going on, contextualized in their settings with people involved and so on. So actually, impact evaluation can be done through sort of these stories. And I think that the library in a way is an example of that, right? Of scaling up like lots and lots of these different stories next to each other. Yeah, and it's an interesting question. I've been thinking about writing a piece that connects awakening experiences to thinking about theory of change, because I was asking myself, like, I'm interested in awakening. I use that language because I come from a sort of a Zen Buddhist background. I'm interested in that, and I'm interested in theories of change and impact and how people think about how change really works. And I'm like, well, these interests are very different from each other, seemingly, but actually I can really connect them, right? It's really about being reflexive about, in one sense, who am I? What does it mean to be conscious? What does it mean to be in the world? What's my connection to the sacred? And the other is, what do I really believe about how the world has changed? How do we see change happen? How does that work? And these things are very connected to each other. And I think there's a lot of work that can be done to break out of that very limited, like the quantitative indicators and so on have their place. They surely do, right? But we need to open it up to qualitative storytelling, to really diving much more deeply in what, because if you do a survey or something and people tell you that thing X has improved their lives, you still don't know anything, right? You don't know why, you don't see how these things work. People also, self-reporting is also sometimes very bad, right? They say something, but it didn't actually work like that. So there's all kinds of methodological issues with this. So I think opening up our conceptions of what it even means to evaluate impact in the first place, and to really look at our own theories of change and the ways in which we sometimes sort of cling to these quantitative indicators because we're just afraid to admit that we don't know and that we don't understand what we're looking at. I think it's a big challenge and this is well known in the world of impact evaluation in that literature. It's a lot about fear as well, because you ask people to report, how many babies they helped come into the world or something. And if you ask a creative practitioners, for instance, to report about things, people are afraid to lose funding. So what happens? People, embellish the truth, or they lie, and then everyone's lying in the system, and it's just a bunch of nonsense, right? So how do we make a safe space for safely reflecting on and evaluating the real impact of our work is a big question, I think, as well.
Yeah. Well, I love your perspective on this. Let's sorry, Magdalena, I want to make sure we have time for Q&A. I think we're at that moment. So I'm going to now invite Karen. Thank you all for a really wonderful conversation, and I love the perspective that you guys shared with us. Karen, why don't you pose a question here for the group, or whoever it's for?
Thank you. Yes, we have several questions, and thank you everyone who's in attendance for offering these up. I'm going to combine a few of these because I can see that there's a similar thread. And so this first question is for the entire panel. How can faith communities and spirituality contribute to systems change in the Western world when social impact spaces often resist spiritual perspectives and privilege some traditions over others?
Yeah, so maybe I will respond to this with my personal story a little bit, because I come from a Western world, even though I'm originally from Slovakia. So I was born in a former communist country, which might be a little bit different from other Western countries, but still where Slovakia is nowadays and the way I was educated and in certain aspects is very Western. And then I moved to Mexico and I started working with the indigenous communities here, and the whole new world opened up to me. And I was like, wow, so everything that I grew up thinking could be actually completely different. And there are people who think about world differently, and there are people who experience world differently. And so I think that one thing that it requires is, from a Western world, if we really want to maybe even change the narrative about certain spiritual beliefs, or if we want social change to be more rooted in spirituality, is to be open to other ideas, to be open to other beliefs, to be open to explore that there are other realities outside of the one that I actually know, which I have to say I'm a bit critical in this regard towards the Western world, because it's really difficult to see that happening. But I think we will hopefully get there at some point. because yeah, there's not only one way. There's not only one way to see the world. There are many other ways, and we can learn from each other and just absorb what really works.
Yeah, I think that where we can start. I mean, I think this sort of like dominance of certain ways of seeing the world is unfortunately very ingrained in existing power structures, and it's not just a matter of talking about it and solving it, right? It's, you know, Habermas has just died, but I think he was a little bit limited in these ways sometimes. But I think that pointing out very clearly what the limits of certain dominant perspectives of the world are is still helpful, and also helping people see their own limitations in this regard, right? What do you really, having very fundamental conversations about what do you believe the life is, what is the world, what are you, and so on, and going to these sort of deeper levels, I think is part of the solution, and we never really get to talk about that with each other, right? So think about having that conversation before you start building a new city in the Netherlands, for instance. It's very unusual, right? So yeah, it's a place to start.
Yeah, and I would add to the I think your story, Magdalena, really points to this a kind of contact theory, like seeing how other people's worldviews play out. So you know, the indigenous people and communities, it's just see everything interconnected. And that is, you know, until you get exposed to those kinds of ideas, if you live in a Western context, that's kind of hard to get your head around. It really speaks to your own personal experience. And I would just say lifting up examples where faith communities, spiritual communities are in fact coming together. I think there is a dominant narrative right now that, you know, all religion is bad. There's lots of problematic aspects of faith and faith traditions, and that is the seat of love at its best. And so your story, Magdalena, of the Catholic priest with these indigenous or with these local women, the beekeepers, is a beautiful example of an ecumenical spirit that's bringing something to life. So I think just more storytelling around that is really important.
One thing that I would like to mention as well regarding storytelling is that in the Western world, there's actually a move away from the grounds reporting now. There's a lot of storytelling told from, you know, just sitting around a computer and finding information. And as what Magdalena was talking about, it's pretty much impossible to wrap your head around the different people's worldviews when you're not around them. And so if you're writing a story about a certain community in Mexico and you're in the United States or Europe and you don't understand their worldview, then what you write is going to be pretty erroneous. And so I think it's really important to go in the ground, to do the work, and to get to know the people and to study about their worldview, their relationship to the land, to the people, to the community. Otherwise, you know, we're not getting the whole picture.
Karen, is there another question?
Thank you. Yes, and it's a big one. So you've touched a little bit on this as in some of your discussion. As technology and AI reshape society, how do we protect human and spiritual connection, restore our relationship with the more than human world, and create systems that recognize spiritual identity rather than excluding it?
Such a hard question. Jumping in it quickly with an example from games, a very encouraging. So games have been the subject of a kind of culture war between progressive and right-wing parts of society for a decade and a half, and it's been very ugly. But one thing that's quite encouraging is that whenever a game developer, especially the big ones, are starting to use AI, they get so much pushback from across the political spectrum. People don't want games to be made with AI. They want developers to have the chance to make, you know, artists, right? To have the chance to make games. They want to hear the stories of artists. They love to see the process, and they support the people. And at least many of them support the people who make it. So it's very encouraging to see that how dangerous it is for game developers to even imply that their game has been made with AI. Very unexpected, right? In a way, you would expect people to just be like happy consumers, you know, consuming everything that's there. And I'm sure that there's many people out there like that, but there's a group of a large group of people out there who want games to be a craft and an artistic practice. And I think that's an interesting example. when many people just set the norm or the value that this is something we just don't expect as consumers or as participants in a community, and to the degree where the people who create the work really have to think about that very carefully, right? I think that's interesting.
This is not even close to an answer to this very provocative question, but one of our colleagues here at the Fetzer Institute talks a lot about how, in the turn of the 20th century, it was really the era of the hands, right? It was the Industrial Revolution. It was, what can we make? And then, it's moved into the era of the mind. How smart can we be? And now this next era really is, as AI kind of takes over, it really begs the question is when is the era of the heart? And how do we maintain the heart-centeredness that the world is pulling us from? And so that really speaks to me about spiritual practice, inner work, devotion, really, however you get there. It really speaks to going in before you go out, or as you go out. Aaron, I guess we have time for one more.
I will share, this is more of a reflection that was offered, and it was, I would have thought that what makes a spiritual solution is that it's based in love, no?
Give an amen to that.
Well, I definitely agree, and we just started talking about that, and I think that's a level where we can probably all connect, right? That's something that we're all searching for. That's something that we all need, it's. Yeah, when Noah was talking about the epidemic of loneliness, there was this interesting study recently, and that actually said that there's one region in the world where people don't feel as lonely as in other regions, and it's actually Latin America. And I believe it's because people still spend a lot of time together with their families, with their community, without phones very often. Like there is that time and space created to co-live, to coexist, to celebrate, which is a very integral part of this society, is to celebrate and not like be disturbed with the technology and with like all this other world that is trying to constantly like pull us in and away from what really matters.
Yeah. Well, maybe we'll end on that. If today has shown us anything, it's that spiritual grounding is not separate from social transformation. In fact, in many places, it is what sustains it. So you can access spiritual resources and spiritual practices on our website. And we'd love for you to stay connected to us here at Fetzer and all of the folks that are connected to Fetzer through that. I just want to say thank you to all of the panelists, to the Alliance, to all my Fetzer colleagues, and all of you for tuning in. Thank you for your presence, your work, your commitment to shared flourishing and the importance of spiritual solutions to social problems. Look forward to continuing this conversation. Thank you all.